Now, I first heard of Tim Kinsella in 1995 after picking up the Captain Jazz album, Schmappin' Schmazz. I mean, that record was just the beginning of new music beginnings by Tim Kinsella. Every release of his was so unexpected and different from the last one, and I think this is why he gets such poor reviews. The critics can't place him or his projects in any category, and they rely on bands staying in their little box of sounds, but Tim explodes that, and he strays far, far, far away from what he previously did. Now, as a listener and as a fan, I saw that, but I didn't get what he was doing or how he did it. I just knew what he was doing was very special. Now, and from that, he opened a giant door into the Chicago sound, a sound I fell in love with, and that has shaped me as a musician myself. For those that don't know, Tim fronted the bands Captain Jazz, Joan of Arc, Owls, Make Believe. He's put out solo records. Then he started a group with his wife called Good Fuck, but now they're going under the name Tim Kinsella and Jenny Pulse. Now, on a sunny day in March, Tim and I sat in his Chicago living room and we talked about early Chicago and how it's changed. And with time, Tim has changed with Chicago as well, but remains creatively active in everything he's a part of. There's a lot of musical talent in the Kinsella family. Where does that come from and where does it begin?
Oh, geez. I mean, we don't have like musical parents or something. Like, there wasn't like music around the house. My mom had like Johnny Mathis records. When I was like 2, I went to the neighbor's garage sale. My mom bought me Love Gun and Double Platinum. Then I was just like, that was it. All I did was listen to those records over and over and over and over and over. So then, like, when I realized, like, you know, because I didn't know there was like other records in the world, you know. But I was like 2 years old and was just telling my mom, like, yeah, I'm gonna be in a band. Like, I just knew. I really wanted to play drums. And then again, at a garage sale, she bought me a snare drum because she talked to like the music teacher at school, but he was like band guy, you know. So he was like, well, drummers start by learning snare drums. So they got me the snare drum for my birthday, and I went in the basement. And I remember it so clearly. My parents like standing over me with their hands on their hips, looking down on me, all proud, like, "Go ahead, play us something." And I just hit it as fast and as loud as I could, and as hard as I could, and just screamed at the top of my lungs, "Ah!" like till I like fell down. And then they like took my drum away and were like, "Ah, you should learn how to play guitar," because they were just like so freaked out.
Was there anything you were doing before Captain Jazz?
Yeah, I was in like, you know, bands in junior high that I think we played like the school variety show. But that was like 87, 88, and it was like crossover was like a big issue. Like, why can't punks and metalheads unite? We don't have to fight, you know? So it was like very crossover oriented band.
When Mike gets involved in music, was that with Captain Jazz or something else?
That was the first version of Captain Jazz. Was called Toe Jam, and it had like a Iron Cross logo with the O and the A overlapping to make an anarchy symbol. So we like switched instruments. Mike played guitar in that, and he switched to drums. And there was like 2 guys that we felt like weren't taking it seriously enough or something, you know.
Right.
I was 15. Toe Jam. I was 13 when it started.
Oh, wow.
And then I would have just turned 16 when Captain Jazz started. I mean, when we broke up, Mike had just graduated high school a month before.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, we were real little.
Now, Captain Jazz ends. In your mind, were you purposely wanting to do something completely different from what you were previously doing?
Yeah, it must have been. I mean, there was basically a year in between Captain Jazz's last show and Joan of Arc's first show. Would have been like July to June, and in that time I had 2 bands going. One was with Jeremy, who I started Joan of Arc with, who it was just kind of like guitar and tape loops, and we were just sort of like seeing how long our tape loops could be, and then he was also like starting to like modify the electronics in toys to make them into musical instruments, like early circuit hacking stuff. And then I had this sort of like Modern Lovers kind of band that I just like, it was super poppy, and that was with Sam and Eric. And then Jade Tree, who I'd gotten to know through the Promise Ring, was like, okay, get a band together and we'll do it. And I was like, well, I got 2 bands. And they're like, well, what's it gonna be? And then I sort of smashed the 2 together. And then we were called Red, Blue, Yellow, but we played our first show and it went so bad that we like that was so humiliating to me, and we named start over.
Were you knowing that people were going to be confused, maybe pissed, especially after Captain Jazz, and everyone loved that sound? Because when I saw Joan of Arc live, people were confused and they were expecting more Captain Jazz. When that 7-inch came out, was J-Tree, the fans, really accepting of the new sound of Joan of Arc?
No, I mean, I have a long history of being poorly received, and then 5 years later everyone's like, that record ruled, why don't you do that right now? And it's like, well, because that was 5 years ago. I don't know. Like, quit shitting on what I'm doing right now.
What the...
So the one thing I know, we existed, it was a very different Chicago then. It's not like now. Maybe there's 21-year-olds that would say this now, but I'd be pretty surprised. It was just a very ripe moment in Chicago. We were all going to no-wave shows all the time. We were going to noise shows all the time. We were going to free jazz shows all the time. We were going to like drone shows all the time. All the post-rock stuff was happening here. Our friends were DJs and painters, and there was no like boundaries. And so the one thing, and we were like pretty deeply invested in all that. So the one thing we consciously said that we did intentionally was this idea of music for no audience. We were like, if we pander to any one clique that we recognize as like, here's our audience, then we're like selling ourselves short and we aren't being ambitious enough. We need to know that we can't be pigeonholed in the scene.
Now, I'm not sure how this works. In the beginning, you were exposing yourself to a broad sound of different shows, art, and the records were weird, with moments of catchy pockets, and then there's records when you're like, where in the hell are they? But with time, you're going out less, and now you're getting older, not seeing or hearing as much as you did in the beginning. Did you notice that your records are having less outside influence and more internal influence?
Oh yeah, for sure. In terms
but that
of
makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense as a question. And it's also like, it just makes sense if you continue in any one discipline. It's like, you know, your guitar playing is going to start to be inspired by your guitar playing, you know? Like,
right, yeah.
Because you can't help but be like, oh, I sound like myself, I've done this before, where's a new, you know, like, talking about these scenes, it was like we were looking for, like, where are these cracks that we can sort of, not even in terms of, like, this sounds opportunistic or shallow, like, oh, we're looking for cracks in these scenes, so, but more like cracks where, like, it seems like some real intense expression can happen in these cracks, you know, like, if there's like a sort of, the boundary of this stylistic thing is here and the boundary of this rubs up against it, and anything that happens on either side of that is like cliched or expected. Within that, people have a tolerance to it and it won't have the same effectiveness. But if we could find these cracks, maybe you could like surprise people.
I hate saying this, but were you trying to stay away from or dodge the emo tag with Joan of Arc, but ride close enough because people will find the cracks and they're surprised or not surprised?
I think surprise for the sake of surprise is surprise for the sake of impact. Because I was like bored by things I was seeing. And like I know that like the greatest gifts I've ever received are like seeing a band or musician and you're like, how did they do that? You know, and it's like I love that feeling, that thrill, and it's inspiring. And so it was just kind of like if we have any chance of doing that, it has to be this we need to throw away all that stuff. I mean, we all switched instruments.
Wait, so you guys would switch instruments to challenge yourselves or to change the writing?
I mean, we still switch instruments quite a bit when we play, but like Sam played bass in Captain Jazz, then he played drums in Joan of Arc. I didn't play guitar in Captain Jazz, but I played guitar in Joan of Arc. Mike played drums in Captain Jazz, moved to guitar.
I like hearing this. What you're doing, the surprise, the shock, it all started back with your folks with the drums. And it's like, hey, oh boy, that's not how you do it, but that's how I do it.
Well, it was just, I mean, that was more like a irrepressible, you know, my impulse to play music didn't come from like, oh, I hear beautiful Beach Boys melodies. It came from like, I have some compressed rage that needs to come out.
I dig that you didn't follow the trends of Chicago at the time. You explored every nook and cranny and sound and visual that you were offered. And then you've done this really great thing with what feels like 1,000 records with Joan of Arc. Were your members changing on purpose to keep things fresh?
Oh, the lineup changes?
Yeah,
It's largely dependent on like who got married this year and doesn't want to go on tour, and who got divorced this year and wants to go on tour, and who got a job they hate but it pays better than tour. And
yeah, I've noticed some members do come back later.
And it keeps things interesting because it's like there's still, I don't think, a record where Todd and Sam are both big contributors, but they've both been in and out half a dozen times just according to their lives.
You not singing on 1984, was that planned?
Yeah. For a long time we'd been joking about like I want the Joan of Arc record where I'm not even on it, and we couldn't exactly do that. Yeah, there was a whole 6 years of trying to figure out how to do that record. Like we started playing with Melina as like I was helping her write, like put together. She had these songs that she was just writing a cappella, and I was helping her kind of figure out how to piece them together. And then then we were sort of her backing band for, I don't know, 6 months or a year or something. We were trying to do it and it wasn't exactly working, and then she got absorbed into Joan of Arc, and we were still like, we just could never find the right approach for how to, and when I say approach, I don't mean song by song, I mean like, how's our entry point? Like, how do we accompany these
As this lineup?
Yeah, well, as the accompaniment to her a cappella songs.
Gotcha, okay. Yeah. Did you write lyrics for 1984?
That's 100% her words.
Oh, okay, I was curious. Was that fun for you, not having that responsibility of writing words and focusing on instruments and more orchestrating the project, or just being part of the group Joan of Arc?
I'm part of the group, and I think I sort of like developed the system for how the thing would get made, you know, like the sort of step-by-step process of how to make
approach the record, or this?
Yeah.
Okay.
We made the record before that in a really weird way, doing super long jams where I had read a thing about a Bob Dylan recording session where he insisted that every instrument he owns was set up and ready to go, so he could just walk around the room and grab whatever he wants and play it. And we were like, man, that sounds liberating. So we would go to weird spaces and set everything up.
Where was 1984 recorded at?
All over. We did 4 days a month for like 6 months. We did like 1 day of setup, and then like that night and 2 days of recording, and then 1 day of organizing. Then we take 3 weeks off and just sort of
different setting, different studios.
Yeah, no
studios, just different locations.
Yeah, no studios. There was an art gallery, and there was like a big warehouse, and there was a basketball court. And
So this record became more about the space you were recording in then, right?
yeah, we would spend a whole day figuring out the feng shui of like.
There you go.
And then we would just sort of be like, okay, the only thing we know is we aren't stopping for an hour, and everyone would sort of float between things. And it sounds kind of tough, but then you do it enough, and it's like you get super warmed up. And so that's how we made the record before 1984. Was we had like 9 hours of jams, and then we like went through those and like picked out.
Oh, you did just a jamming.
So, yeah.
Were they written, or are you guys like, here we go, 9 hours of us going?
Yeah.
During the recording of 1984, was there a space or a song that you can talk about?
I mean, it's hard because there's like the way we've made the last few records. We don't like we listen back to it to learn how to play stuff live, and we have no idea who's playing what. Because the way we would do it, we would just record these long jams, and
Kind of blindly?
no, we had two parameters. We would have a strobe light, like a click track happening, either at 80 BPMs, which is like general trap BPM,
Yeah.
or 140, which is like a techno BPM.
Okay.
And so we would be able to float things in and out. But other than that, it was just sort of like everything on the record is 80 or 140. And we would then have two of us do, every one of us has like a Pro Tools setup or access to one. So at the end of a session, we'd be like, okay, here is, let's say 6 of these, and there's 5 of us. Okay, us 2 will do this one, us 2 will do this one. So there's always 2 people editing each jam, so that if they chose the same moment, then we would know that was like a kernel of something. And then a lot of stuff, we would have 3 weeks to sort of decide before the next session, like, oh, let's use this thing, but we're going to layer it. So we would like loop it and layer it, and then, so there is no writing process. There's no like
Sort of like a homework after a session, like everyone gets the clay and playfully sculpts the work at
it
home.
doesn't feel like work.
Well, yeah, playing, like, everybody gets to play, and, like,
Yeah.
I gotta take on this version.
There's like a Bresson thing about like the 5 births and deaths of a film, you know, like it comes alive in the writer's mind, then it like dies on the page, and it comes alive in the actor's mouth, and it dies in the camera, then it comes alive in the editing. And
Right.
that's like a thing that's like always stuck with me, even if I just misquoted it.
Sounds right. Feels like you nailed it.
It feels right to me.
Right, I like it.
But this idea of like mixing, it shouldn't be like, oh, we're being creative because we're standing in a room together with instruments, but now we aren't being creative because we're mixing. Or it was this idea to make every step of the process active.
Did you have a favorite room?
Because are you writing one song per room?
Hell no.
Just-
That's what I'm saying.
just-
like,
just
I couldn't even
sounds.
tell you what room. There's no way to know.
Sorry, so everyone understands this. You just went to the auditorium
Like we
and
would camp out for 4 days. Like I said, we would arrive at like 11 or noon and load in and sort of like feel out the space and be like, okay, if we set everything up along here, then we have a kind of a path to move around, and it would take a long time to mic it up. And then me and Melina like split up. I think we narrowed it down to probably like 20 songs, and then me and Melina were sort of like, okay, I'll do this 6, you do this 6, this 6, we would sit together and write. So it was always trying to keep, like, I don't know if I've used the word collage yet, but what we were talking about earlier about finding the cracks in the scenes, and then like not being as inspired by like a cultural thing as much as a personal thing, as finding the cracks in your own playing next. And then this approach was sort of like finding the cracks in our group, you know, so that there wasn't like you can't get less hierarchical than like we're just setting up and jamming and everyone can edit, and then everyone edits everyone's edits, and yeah, so that's...
in the beginning, Chicago gave you so much. Now, have you noticed that it got less for you, and why did it?
Partly I'm 44 years old instead of 22, and so like I don't like I could never drink as much whiskey or as much everything as I was doing for years, and like even walk, you know, and I would never have the energy to socialize that much. So maybe there's 22-year-olds who are feeling just as inspired right now as I did then.
Do you see the changes of Chicago?
Yeah, every moment.
You know what I mean? Like being so in
Yeah.
the blood of it, just like, then it's like, wait, where
Yeah.
are we now?
Yeah, it's weird.
At the early point of your exploration of music, you looked for the cracks in the scene. And now as the search spectrum has more focus, and in a sense it is shrunk, what has that given you now?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, like, there's a shift. I remember in, like, 2013 or 12 or 13, I remember we had this really long drive home from the West Coast. It was the end of a tour, and we were like, it's really becoming more about hanging out with each other playing music than it is, like, I hope people are here, and what's the guarantee, and how did we do in merch. I feel like there's so many punk lessons I learned as a kid that just get so much deeper as an adult, but that was like a thing that you might think as a kid, like, oh, I don't care how many people are there, whatever. But then slowly these things start to matter. And then we really did just sort of break free of it as a group, you know? Like, we just got really into our own ways of extending each other's possibilities, you know?
May we all make it home safely. May we all make it home safely.
I mean, the respect for his discipline and the how he challenges himself to stay creative is just, it's brilliant. And the guy's put out 35 records for Joan of Arc, 20 records from his other projects, and it's for sure not all of it, but he's done. The guy is a nonstop. I mean, he's a wrecking ball of creativity. I mean, he's knocked down all standards of how a record should be recorded or produced. And he's found a group of musicians with similar wants as artists. Now that is like beyond special to me. It feels like Tim approaches an entire record like it's a documentary film. He makes a plan, he goes into an unknown location and captures every unexpected moment. The plot just unravels in front of them, and then they edit the story as a group, and then the truth of the record is unveiled to everyone. Not just the listener, but to the band themselves. That's why this makes Tim one of the most exciting songwriters to listen to, because you'll never be able to put your finger on him.